Alright, my friends, let me show you how this character appears from nowhere to become the Oathbreaker Knight's worst nightmare. Notice that we're hiding, and we have precast Spirit Guardians. You can have Spirit Guardians running while hiding, as long as you hide after casting it. We're then going to use Shadow Step to appear directly next to the Oathbreaker Knight. So we're just going to go ahead and teleport here. And let's go ahead and use a Stunning Strike. We don't actually need to do this because the damage from the Spirit Guardians and our attack is going to trigger a surprise round, which will stun him anyways, but just for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to show how the Stunning Strike does additional damage. We'll also get him with a Touch of Death for even more damage here, and then you can see he takes extra Spirit Guardians damage at the start of his turn. We also, because we started combat, get to use a Flurry of Blows as well. So we're going to go ahead and cast Flurry of Blows here for even more damage. And thanks to some wonky turn ordering, the game lets us use yet another Touch of Death for even more damage. And then yet another one. So you can see that the Oathbreaker Knight has taken a huge burst of unresistible necrotic damage, thanks to our Death Cleric ability, not letting his necrotic resistance work on this, and is also stunned, surprised, and taking constant irresistible damage from Spirit Guardians. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, I'll be covering a build I'm calling the Shadowed Slaughterer. This character steps forth from the darkness to annihilate unsuspecting foes. Your very presence causes their flesh to wither and die, and your touch is the touch of death itself. This build combines powerful burst damage with great crowd control and unparalleled mobility, and uses a very unusual class split, so your enemies will truly never see you coming. While this build is intended more to be thematic than maximally powerful, it still packs plenty of punch for Honor Mode, and also comes with a number of options to use some of the most broken item combinations in the game, so we can power it up or down as much as you want. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Josh Hobbs for the $5 donation, Trengilly for the $10, and Emir Emiroglu, Monkey What Chicken Butt, ESB, and John Walker for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's embrace the darkness. I'm using Shadowheart as the example character here because I think that this build makes an incredibly thematic Dark Justiciar or Shadow Assassin of Shar. So for a more dark side oriented Shadowheart playthrough, I think that this build is incredibly thematic. I also think it would work very well for a more vampirically oriented Astarion, if you wanted to take him in that direction. If you're building this as a custom character, then what race you pick mostly doesn't matter, but a lot of the ones that I recommend typically are actually a little bit different for this build in particular. Halfling is especially phenomenal for this character because the ability to reroll ones works both to maintain concentration on your spells and to land your many attacks, preventing natural ones from stopping you from doing stuff. And also, since we're going to be teleporting rather than moving a lot of the time, our movement speed is much less relevant. For the same reason, while Wood Elf and Half Wood Elf still make excellent choices, they're less impactful for this build than for many other builds, so still a great pick, but not as optimal from a strict mechanical perspective. At first level, we're going to be starting with a level of Monk. For this build, the order that you level doesn't matter as much, so if you prefer to start with Cleric from a lore perspective, you can definitely do that and take the Monk levels later on. But starting with Monk does give us a couple small advantages. Firstly, Monk has Stealth as a skill known, and this character is going to be hiding a lot and sticking to the darkness, so having Stealth in order to make stealth checks, especially for ranged attacks, will be pretty powerful, and so you do want to have that option. Also, at time of recording, Cleric is still getting 2 extra skills when you multi-class into it later on, so we might as well take advantage of that since we have the ability to do so. As a monk, of course, we get a bunch of really powerful early game tricks, and one of the things that makes this build fun and powerful to play is just how good it is in the early game. We get a lot of the very best early game tools out there, both for in and out of combat, and so this character really smooths out the difficult early games in Honor Mode. Monks give you Flurry of Blows, which lets you do 3 attacks when another character would be only doing 1. And we also get martial arts dexterous attacks, which allows our weapon attacks to scale using our dexterity. This is very powerful because it means that the character can be almost completely single attribute dependent, or SAD, which is, of course, a good thing, especially since being SAD is just very thematic for Shadowheart. For our ability scores, because this character is single attribute dependent, we get away with the most greedy possible attribute split in the game. We're going to start with 17 dexterity, 16 wisdom, and 15 constitution. That's the highest you can get 3 individual scores. If you really hate the odd numbers and want a little bit of extra jump distance early, you can move these points into strength and then respec at level 5 when you would be leveling these skills anyways. But just for the purpose of this video, I'm presenting it without the respec because those points don't really matter early on. This lets us get really high scores in all 3 of our relevant abilities. We'll even out these odd numbers later on, and makes the character, again, as strong as possible, especially in the more difficult early game, which is what matters most in Honor Mode. For our skill selection here, we're going to be taking Acrobatics. You don't want to be getting pushed around on this character, and as a dex-based character, Acrobatics is how you'll resist having that happen, and Stealth. There's plenty of situations where you might want to roll a Stealth roll when you're playing a Shadow Monk. You're going to be hanging out in the dark a lot, and this character also, as a dexterity character, gets to use ranged weapons pretty effectively, which benefit a lot from being able to make stealth checks so you can shoot and not have enemies notice you. So having stealth in the early game is, again, very helpful and will remain relevant throughout the entirety of the game. As a monk, that's all the decisions that we have to make at level 1, so let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're immediately going to multiclass and take a level of Cleric. This gets us a lot of utility and a number of other pretty powerful functions early on. Gets us medium armor proficiency, which there will be, even though we have 16 AC unarmored, there will be times when wearing medium armor is better in the early game, and you prefer to have the extra AC to the extra mobility from being unarmored as a monk, so medium armor proficiency is really nice. And of course it gets us all of the Cleric's awesome utility spells, as well as a bunch of additional burst damage, which is, again, very powerful in the early game of Honor Mode. For our Cleric subclass, we will of course be taking Death Domain. Not only does this give us a bunch of great ranged options in the early game, and Death Domain, again, is one of the most powerful things you can be in the early game as a Cleric, because the doubled cantrips are so powerful at fighting early game encounters. It will also later on give us tremendous amounts of burst damage to add to our melee attacks, and at this point also gives us extra burst damage that we can deal in place of melee attacks when we want a particularly dangerous enemy dead. For our Death Domain bonus Cleric cantrip, we're going to be taking Bone Chill. Again, this powers up our early game immensely. This is a very strong early game damage cantrip when doubled as a Death Domain Cleric, and 2 Bone Chill attacks is more damage than archers or warlocks are doing at this point. So again, our early game is very, very powerful. If you're on console, you need to go forward to this screen and pick Bone Chill, and then go back to pick your Cleric cantrips, because one of the cantrips that we want is Toll the Dead, and it's selected as the Death Domain cantrip by default, so console, it won't let you pick this until you go and change that. So that's why we have to do that in that order. In addition to Toll the Dead, we're also going to take Guidance. Of course, Guidance will power up our party's ability to make skill checks, and is basically mandatory for every party to have, so almost any character that can have access to Guidance should, and we'll pick up Resistance. Resistance is really nice for certain story events where you know you're going to have to make a saving throw, so again, having access to these utility cantrips makes your party a lot better. We also have 2 of the best damage cantrips in the game, Toll the Dead to target a saving throw, and Bone Chill to target enemy armor class. Thanks to the bug, we also get to pick 2 Cleric bonus skills. You can pretty much pick whatever here. If you do want this character to be your party face, say you're playing an Origin Shadowheart run, you can put this point into Persuasion, and then maybe take some extra Charisma by evening out your attribute split. That this character does have room to do that if that's what you want, but mostly these don't matter. We also get to prepare for additional spells, and in addition to the normal spells that clerics are almost always going to take, we're going to pick up Command, of course, as, again, extremely powerful crowd control, Healing Word, because a bonus action ranged heal to keep our allies alive is very good as well. Bless is particularly good for this character because we're going to hit our attacks more often, and we'll be making a lot of attacks, so we will actually use the bonus hit chance that Bless gives you, ourselves, rather than many clerics which cast this only on their allies. And then finally, we also want Inflict Wounds. We're going to be playing up in melee a lot, and 3d10 necrotic damage for the attack roll is a huge amount of burst early game. In addition to that, as a monk, we can also still make a flurry of blows after casting Inflict Wounds. So an enemy that we really want dead, we can hit with this really powerful burst damage spell, and then use our bonus action to flurry them, and most early game enemies just can't survive that turn from an early game character, so your early levels are very, very strong. At level 3, we're going to go back into Monk. Of course, we want to get our extra attack and Monk teleport from Shadow Monk online as quickly as possible, so we need to take levels in Monk, but also leveling Monk gives us yet more really strong early game tools. Step of the Wind, Dash, and Disengage, while not as good as the rogue versions of these abilities, because they take a key point to use, are still very powerful for spellcasters, which we mostly still are. We have a hybrid spellcasting and melee style at this point in the game. Because the ability to leave bad engagements is really strong. Also, if a fight starts turning against you in honor mode, these abilities get you out of it. At character level 4, we're taking our 3rd level of Monk, and we get to choose our Monk subclass, which we already know is the Way of Shadow. This gets us a bunch of powerful abilities. So firstly, we already get Pass Without Trace, which goes well with our stealth checks, and Darkness, which even though we don't currently have a way to see through it, is nonetheless a very, very powerful ability in the early game. You can blind enemies with no saving throw using this ability. Silence is also very good. This character can get up on top of enemy spellcasters and silence them, and because you can just punch things, you're not particularly affected by being silenced. But the real prize here is Shadowheart's Hide, which lets you cast ranged spells and then or use a bow shot and then hide immediately, allowing you to deal damage when enemies can't retaliate to you. And of course, Minor Illusion, again, one of the most powerful cantrips in the game, letting you split enemies away from their allies so that you can assassinate them one by one, or group them up so that you can drop a big AoE spell on them. So Shadow Monk, again, gives us some of the best out-of-combat utility in the form of Minor Illusion and Pass Without Trace, and Darkness, and then also gives us a really powerful in-combat tool, letting us hide after we use our attacks. At level 5, we're taking our 4th level of Monk, which of course gets us a feat. And for this feat, we're just going to take an ability score improvement and even out our dexterity and constitution. It's also worth mentioning that this character can be played as a Tavern Brawler monk. This is built as a dexterity-based weapon monk for this build guide, but Tavern Brawler is always extremely powerful. If you're doing Tavern Brawler, then you'll take Tavern Brawler as your feat at this level, of course, and just use a Strength Elixir every day, because the way that Tavern Brawler works, it adds your Strength modifier twice to your unarmed strikes, so if you use an Elixir of Strength every day, you get double the benefit of that. So, obviously an extremely powerful option. If you want to use an Elixir every day to make the character stronger, definitely something that you can do. For this version of the build, though, we're just increasing our dexterity. Then at level 6, with our 5th level of Monk, of course we get extra attack, which doubles our damage output, allowing us to make 4 attacks in a given round of combat. At this point, the character is going to be making mostly weapon attacks rather than casting spells, because of course you still only have level 1 inflict wounds for your spell damage, but the bless and everything that you have from Cleric will support your monk damage extremely well. We also get Stunning Strike, an absurdly strong ability that lets us shut down enemies. This character with access to Command and Stunning Strike, and at this point with 16 Wisdom, Command is still reasonably reliable, especially if you've given this character some save DC gear. With access to Command and Stunning Strike, you have many of the very best ways to shut down enemies in the game. Cloak of Shadows is also a very strong ability, giving you effectively free invisibility, which can let you obviously set up ambushes and surprise rounds on enemies. However, there is a bug with this ability, so it's supposed to keep you invisible as long as you stay in an obscured area. So as long as you don't move into bright light, you'll stay invisible. Thanks to a bug, if you transition from a lightly obscured area to a heavily obscured area, or vice versa, it will also break, so you need to be careful not to move between areas of deeper or lesser shadows while you're using this ability. If you've had trouble using it in the past, it's probably because of that bug. But as long as you're aware of that and know to stick to one type of shadows, free invisibility is of course incredibly strong. At character level 7, we get the signature ability of the Shadow Monk, Shadow Step. This ability is just awesome. It is effectively free Misty Step every single turn, and we all know how good Misty Step is, as long as you're moving in between areas of darkness. This character is always going to want to stick to the shadows, so the starting location should usually be obscured, though of course this does come with some caveats in Act 2, so you need to be aware of the darkness mechanics that exist in Act 2 and play around those. Free Misty Step every turn is just ridiculous amounts of mobility. This gets you into position, it gets you out of bad positions, it lets you pick off isolated enemies, especially if they're on patrol routes that take them away from their allies. You can just pop out behind them and take them down before anybody can possibly react. Shadow Step just giving you constant free teleporting is, of course, just amazing. We also get additional mobility with improved unarmored movement, and we now have access to a bunch of the gear that gives you extra AC even while unarmored, so this character can have pretty strong armor class unarmored and be very fast as well. Now that we have what we're looking for from our monk levels, it's time to go back to Cleric to increase our burst damage, sustained damage, and our party utility. At level 2 of Death Cleric, we get Channel Divinity Touch of Death, which basically lets us add a smite attack to any melee attack. This works off any melee attack, so it can be a melee attack made with our weapon, an unarmed attack, or a flurry of blows attack made as a bonus action. It can also be made as part of another ability, like Stunning Strike, so you can Stunning Strike and then still use Touch of Death. You can also use it off of melee spell casts, like Inflict Wounds. At this level, it does 9 bonus damage, because it is equal to 5 plus double your cleric level in terms of bonus damage, which isn't much, but 9 damage does add up. And of course, as we continue to level in cleric, it's going to be even more burst damage, which lets us kill some enemies, stun some enemies, and shut down other enemies with even more abilities, because remember, this gets added to our already very high damage output. At Cleric level 3, we of course get second level spells, and there's a few for this build that are particularly strong. While our spellcasting is still taking a secondary role to our melee attacking at this point, there are some second level spells that really support that plan. Things like Spiritual Weapon to distract enemy attacks and block doorways can be very useful. And of course, if we want to go the route of using Arcane Acuity, this character is a melee attacker that also casts spells, so Hold Person with Arcane Acuity is a very, very strong option. You can also, of course, use the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, since this is an enchantment, to cast it as a bonus action. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that lets you get automatic criticals and paralyze enemies. So once again, you benefit sort of on the front end and on the back end from this ability, shutting down enemies because you're building up Arcane Acuity stacks so they can't resist it, and then you're also making melee attacks so you get the automatic criticals. At character level 10, we're taking our 4th level of Cleric, which gets us another cantrip here. There's not a lot that we're that interested in at this point, but so I like to just take Bursting Sinew because it's fun to use sometimes. It won't be particularly impactful, but blowing up corpses is never not funny, so go ahead and just pick that up. And then for our feat, we're just going to take an ability score improvement and max out our dexterity. We're still making mostly weapon attacks, so increasing our dexterity is going to be more impactful than any other feat that we can take. There are a couple other feats worth mentioning, though, especially if you're using story events to boost your dexterity up to 20 naturally. Or are using the Graceful Cloth as your main armor throughout the game, so you'll have 20 dexterity from that, which is an option for this character as well. Alert, of course, is always great on honor mode. Going first is incredibly powerful, especially with a character with as many stuns as this one. Great Weapon Master will work because we're very likely to be using a quarterstaff to attack with for a lot of the game. So if you're using a quarterstaff as your monk weapon, Great Weapon Master will deal extra damage and can be very good there. Savage Attacker, especially if you're a high elf or high half elf, using Booming Blade as part of your setup can increase your damage output as well. And another option that I really like for this character is Sentinel. That will keep enemies trapped inside of your Spirit Guardian's damage and locked down even longer. So if you want to make this character even more disruptive, that's a good option as well. But for this build, we're just going to be taking 2 points in dexterity to max that out. At Cleric level 5, I've already talked about this a little, but we get access to, of course, one of the strongest spells in the game, Spirit Guardians. Spirit Guardians is amazing for any melee character because it just does damage around you, and so enemies are going to be constantly taking damage while you're also punching them. But there's some special synergies that are worth noting for this character in particular with this already very good spell. Spirit Guardians isn't a light source, so while you can't become invisible while concentrating on it, so Shadow Cloak won't work, you can hide while concentrating on Spirit Guardians. So you can cast this spell and then go into hiding. And you can also teleport using Shadow Step without breaking hiding and without breaking Spirit Guardians. That lets you appear right behind enemies with Spirit Guardians already running. The damage from that will then often trigger, causing a surprise round. The enemies will take the damage again at the beginning of their turn, which they won't take because it's a surprise round, and then again at the beginning of their following turn before they actually get to act. This means you can triple dip on Spirit Guardians before enemies take a turn with this character by getting surprise rounds using the teleport by having it pre-cast before combat starts. I will say that the mechanics for this are a little bit fiddly, and I've found that it does bug out sometimes and not give you all of the effects that it should, so I encourage you not to rely on that happening every time for really difficult fights. But against enemies that are numerous, like numerous low health enemies or enemies that you can ambush or pull away from their allies using minor illusion effects and things like that, that combination is brutally effective, and enemies will just be taking constant damage and be completely unable to take a turn. In addition, of course, you have all of your lockdown with Stunning Strike, which again, they'll be taking damage, they'll be stunned, they'll be taking Spirit Guardian damage and not moving. And Command as well. So you have so many options for keeping enemies inside the damage of this ability. It's small amounts of damage, but it adds up turn over turn over turn to give you enormous amounts of value. Obviously, given that I've just talked about it for 2 minutes, we're going to be preparing Spirit Guardians. Other relevant level 3 spells, Mass Healing Word is pretty reasonable on this character. You can actually still carry the buff on heal items even into the late game if you want this character to add some healing support. You're still a cleric, so you still have healing options. Glyph of Warding can give you a decent non-concentration combat spell, though your save DCs won't be amazing, but cold damage is valuable all the time, so still useful. But mostly your level 3 spell slots here are going to be for Spirit Guardians and things like Upcasting Command or Inflict Wounds for extra burst damage. Finally, at character level 12, we're taking our 6th level of Cleric for an extra level 3 spell slot, obviously very useful to cast our level 3 spells more frequently, and also Inescapable Destruction. Ignoring enemy resistance to necrotic damage is incredibly relevant for this character. We do a lot of necrotic damage with Touch of Death, Spirit Guardians we can set to necrotic. Sometimes we might want to cast Inflict Wounds, because a level 3 Inflict Wounds is still a lot of burst damage. So, and also any necrotic damage that we have on our items and everything, this will allow us to ignore resistance there. Even though we're no longer in Act 2, there's still a lot of enemies with necrotic resistance, which this lets us ignore. There's also some other options for our last level here that I did want to touch on, if you want to customize the build a little bit more. Fighter, you can respec to take this at 1st level, and then you get con save proficiency as well as a fighting style, which can be pretty powerful. Or Sorcerer can give you Booming Blade as a cantrip. Again, you want to respec to take this at 1st level, so you get con save proficiency and don't mess up your item save DC. But you can get Booming Blade as a cantrip if you're not playing high elf or high half elf, which again increases your damage even more with your weapon attacks. And also, if you take White Draconic Sorcerer, White Dragon Ancestry as a Draconic Sorcerer. Armor of Agathis is very good for this character as well, because you're just often in melee, so the retaliation damage and extra temp HP can be very helpful also. So a couple other options, but for this version of the build, we're just going to be taking our 6th level of Cleric, because Inescapable Destruction is very powerful as well. All right, my friends, that is the Shadowed Slaughterer, and I hope that it helps you bring fear to your enemies by appearing right behind them and sending them straight to the grave. As always, of course, we can make the build stronger, though, with itemization, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, we get a bunch of really fun options, and also get access to some of the most powerful items in the game if we want to make the character a little bit stronger. Firstly, let's talk about our weapons. So the best endgame weapon for this character is Char's Spear of Evening if you took the story event that gets you this weapon. This gives us the ability to see in magical darkness, so works incredibly well with our Shadow Monk abilities, and is also the best weapon in the game to just make weapon attacks with most of the time, and this character's doing that a lot, so we'll benefit from all of the additional damage, the AoE effect, the free clouds of darkness, and the ability to see through darkness that this weapon gives you. Another great option is the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. This is rarely seen in its function as a stick that you can hit things with, but it's actually a +2 weapon with a d4 of extra necrotic damage, which is a totally reasonable weapon to attack with. It's not the most powerful attacking weapon, but it also gives us free spells. And this character will be casting a lot of necromancy spells. One such necromancy spell is Inflict Wounds. We can often do the last damage to an enemy with an Inflict Wounds in order to guarantee the charge from Staff of Cherished Necromancy, and that can add extra burst damage with spell effects by letting us cast free spells. This isn't as good as if we were a full spellcaster in terms of free spell casts, but still a very powerful option. In the early game, we have some other options that you don't see as much. The Staff of Arcane Blessing, of course, a very nice staff, but especially good for this character, because it's going to buff our Bless effect, and we ourselves make spell attacks. We have Bone Chill, which we can double cast, and we have Inflict Wounds. Both of these use attack rolls, so they benefit from the double effect of Blessing from the Staff of Arcane Blessing if we cast Bless on ourselves. Another great early game option is Nature's Snare. This will allow us to ensnare enemies. Every time we hit them, they have a chance of becoming ensnared, and again, we're making a lot of attacks. Ensnare is a pretty powerful debuff, giving enemies disadvantage on attacks and advantage on attacks against them. It's only a DC 13 save each turn, but that adds up, and enemies will miss a save eventually if you keep attacking with this weapon, so a really nice staff that we can use early game. So this is what you're looking for in the early game. In the late game, something like the Staff of Cherished Necromancy or Char's Spear of Evening. Of course, as a spellcaster, you can always use Mark of Heshkir as well, but probably you have that on another character. For our helmet, we have a bunch of extremely powerful options as well. Of course, the most powerful of these is the Arcane Acuity setups. There's 2 possible ones you can use for this character. The Helmet of Arcane Acuity works incredibly well by giving you Arcane Acuity every time you make a weapon attack. Arcane Acuity increases your bonus to your spell save DCs and attack rolls by 1 for each stack of Arcane Acuity, so it's going to mean that enemies will not be able to save against your spells, including Hold Person and Command. Obviously, one of the most powerful setups in the game, especially when combined with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel that lets you cast those spells as a bonus action. Now, the Helmet of Arcane Acuity is light armor, so you'll want to use it with the armored version of the build. More on that later. But if you want that setup without while still getting to be an unarmored monk, you can also use the Hat of Fire Acuity alongside any set of weapons or gloves that allows you to deal fire damage. One of those sets of gloves is the Flawed Helldusk and later the Helldusk gloves that makes all your weapon attacks deal fire damage. That will let you stack Arcane Acuity with the hat. So again, a very powerful combination. Other great options include the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, which is really nice for this character as well. We're going to inflict a condition basically constantly. A lot of our attacks just naturally inflict conditions. And that gives us Arcane Synergy, which will let our weapon attacks deal an extra amount of damage equal to our Wisdom. So we're just going to get bonus damage all the time from this on our weapon attacks, which we're making lots of. Finally, of course, the Mask of Soul Perception is great for this character. 20 dexterity is enough initiative for most fights, but there's still some fights where we'll definitely lose initiative without alert, so the Mask of Soul Perception makes us more accurate and lets us win initiative rolls as well. For our gloves, we've already touched on the flawed Helldusk and Helldusk gloves. These not only synergize incredibly well with the Hat of Fire Acuity, they also are just amazing for this character. The Helldusk gloves give you a bonus to your spell save DC, which of course is relevant, and give you extra damage on your weapon attacks, which we're making, and extra necrotic damage on your unarmed attacks, which we're making, and also enemies will not be able to resist it because we have Irresistible Destruction as a Death Cleric, so the enemies won't get resistance to that necrotic damage. The bonuses on this are obviously incredibly strong. In the early game, the Bracers of Defense are a great option as well. When you're unarmored, this is just +2 AC for a slot that's not as contested in the early game. And then if another character needs the Helldusk gloves, they're very good on this character, but this is an item that's in high demand. You can also just use the Gloves of Soul Catching. As a monk, increasing your constitution and dealing extra damage on your unarmed strikes is still very, very good. So the Gloves of Soul Catching are a great option. Best in slot, though, is the Helldusk gloves. For our rings, the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, of course, works incredibly well with any character that's making weapon attacks and then casts Command and Hold Person, one of the most powerful things you can do in the game. The Strange Conduit ring, we will always be concentrating on a spell, so our weapon attacks will deal an extra 1d4 psychic damage all the time with the Strange Conduit ring, just increases our damage output. You can go more defensive with the Ring of Protection. This character is in melee and concentrating on spells a lot, so enemies will like to target it, so having high AC can be very beneficial for this character. And another ring that you get to use on this build, but that's not always as heavily contested, because a lot of builds can't use this effectively, is the Shadow Cloaked ring. Most enemies that you're fighting are going to be in darkness, because you're going to try to set up areas of darkness and lure enemies with minor illusion into the shadows. So the Shadow Cloaked ring should usually be on, and an extra 1d4 damage, no questions asked on all of our abilities, very powerful as well. For our cloak, I like the Cloak of Displacement. Enemies having disadvantage on attacking you is great. You don't really want this character targeted with enemy attacks, and they often will like to, because as I mentioned, you're up front a lot, and you are concentrating on spells, so the enemy AI will prioritize attacking this character. The Cloak of Displacement discourages them from doing that, because they will often choose not to attack characters they have disadvantage against. If you're finding that this character gets attacked a lot, then also making sure that you bonus action hide after many of your turns can be very helpful as well. For our amulet, the Amulet of the Devout gives us higher save DCs and extra uses of Channel Divinity, which we're using all the time in order to increase our burst damage, so very helpful for this character. Or, of course, the Amulet of Greater Health is great. It will let us respec the points from Constitution into another stat, so if you wanted to be a party face, you could take Charisma, for example, and then use the Amulet of Greater Health, and obviously makes us much tankier and makes it very, very difficult for us to lose concentration on our spells. Another useful early game setup, and if you don't have another character using these, this character does make a pretty good carrier for the buff on heal items, the Hellrider's Pride and the Whispering Promise, that will give your allies Bless and Blade Ward whenever they get healed. Not only do we have healing spells with bonus action Healing Word and possibly Mass Healing Word later on, we have extra attack, which means we can throw multiple potions in a turn, and you do apply the buffs when you throw a potion to an ally. So this character can put out a lot of healing because of both of those abilities and can use these very well. For our boots, another slightly lesser used boot that I think is very good on this character is the Boots of Arcane Bolstering. This gives you Arcane Charge for 2 turns after dashing. So you can either dash before combat starts or use Step of the Wind dash to dash as a bonus action. The rule here is actually wrong. The tooltip here is wrong. It says, while threatened, affected entity has +2 bonus damage with spells. What this actually means is against any enemy that's threatened, you have +2 bonus damage with spells, which is pretty good because you have Spirit Guardians, which benefits from this. You have a lot of other spell effects that deal damage. We're not doing things like Magic Missile or Scorching Ray that really go off with Arcane Charge, but this does add quite a bit of extra damage. So this is an item that's worth mentioning. In general, though, I think you're going to want the Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo just for extra damage on your unarmed strikes, again, equal to your Wisdom, or a more defensive option like the Evasive Shoes. But the Arcane Bolstering Boots are also very fun on this character. And finally, for our armor, there are two different ways that you can set this character up. You can either use light or medium armor in order to take advantage of some of the really powerful armor sets, or you can stay unarmored in order to take advantage of your monk unarmored defense and bonus movement speed. Either way, you're probably using the Graceful Cloth in the early game. Dexterity is super powerful, and this is an unarmored character, so you want the best unarmored set in the early game, and that's the Graceful Cloth until you get up to 20 dexterity. In the late game, the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation, of course, is very good for any monk. The reaction unarmed strike is pretty powerful for this character as well, just a little bit of extra damage. We're not really using our reactions for other things, so the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation gives us more AC and the reaction. We can also use the Robe of the Weave for bonus save DC and also extra armor class. If you're using one of these setups, you benefit, of course, from the monk's unarmored defense, so you get your additional, you get wisdom additionally to your dexterity, and these bonuses to AC give you pretty respectable armor class. You can also build this as an armored character using the Armor of Agility, which gives you much higher AC and bonuses to saving throws, so it's a more defensive type of build for this character. You want one of the medium armors that allows you to use your full dexterity bonus to AC, of course, so the Armor of Agility is the best of those. Or this character can use the Ballast Armor and makes a great setup for that. This gives you plus initiative and makes enemies vulnerable to piercing damage, which conveniently is what Char's Spear of Evening does. So if you're using the Ballast Armor and Char's Spear of Evening, that makes your damage output suddenly ridiculously high, because of course vulnerability doubles all of the damage that we're doing with our weapon attacks, which will be incredible. So again, we have access, if we want it, to some of the most broken item combinations in the game. Finally, I should also mention that one item set that you very frequently see on clerics that is less powerful for this character is the Radiating Orb item sets. As a Shadow Monk, we want to keep things dark. We don't want to light up our enemies, so we don't want to have to be in light in order to trigger the Callous Glow Ring, and we don't want Radiating Orb to light up our enemies because it's also a light source. So that's why those items, normally mentioned for clerics, are not going to be part of this build. For the most powerful endgame setup, so if you're just looking to completely maximize your power level, we'll be using the armored version of the build, so giving up a little movement speed in order to get the incredibly strong items that require light armor. We'll be using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity to stack Arcane Acuity, the Cloak of Displacement to defend ourselves alongside 19 AC. That means enemies will rarely target you. The Ballast Armor, because it's brokenly powerful and boosts your initiative. The Helldust Gloves for more damage and save DCs. The Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo for additional weapon damage. Char's Spear of Evening, because it works with the Ballast Armor and synergizes with all of our other effects, as well as being an incredibly powerful weapon in its own right. The Amulet of the Devout for more save DCs, so with our Arcane Acuity stacks, we very quickly reach the point where enemies can't resist our saving throws. Band of the Mystic Scoundrel to bonus action cast, hold person, and command. Shadow Cloaked Ring for extra damage output, and because this won't conflict with other party members most likely. And the Hellrider Longbow just to give us plus 10 initiative when combined with the Ballast Armor, so we're always going to be going first in combat, and almost always going to be getting a surprise round. So this is what I will suggest for the most powerful possible endgame setup, though you can tone it down if you don't like having so many broken items combined into one character. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Shadowed Slaughterer, and I hope that you have a ton of fun popping out from behind your unsuspecting foes to obliterate them before they know what's happening. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.